So the last strategy that we're going to be talking about this year is the text-dependent talk strategy. And this just is the idea that whenever students are writing or whenever they're reading, the opportunity to talk about text they create or text they consume is really an opportunity for them to learn and remember those texts. And if we ask them, invite them to not only think about what the text says, so you see in this image there are notes on one side about what the text is saying, but also what the text is doing and how it's doing that. You see notes about that on the far side of the image. If we think about also what the text is doing and how the writer is accomplishing that, how the writer does that, then students are not only learning from text the content that's on the page, but also thinking about the writer's choices about how they represented it. Why did they use paragraphs? How come they're using sentences this way or this particular word? So that when they're writing, they can be strategic about how they decide to set up what they write. If you were writing a recipe, you probably wouldn't want it in a paragraph because your primary purpose is to facilitate a step-by-step process. So you want to show those steps. And if we only give students recipes and never point out, like, why is it set up the way it's set up, they may not realize that they too can create recipes and write them in a way that others will understand. And they may not use those embedded supports in the text, the fact that it goes step by step and the steps are numbered, in order to help them find their way. Same thing with the current events article that's right here. If we think about how the writer is using language, when they use statistics, why they use statistics in those ways, students can turn around and do that as writers, but they can also use that as readers to really understand and critique the text that they're reading. So whenever students are interacting with text, we want to make sure they have a chance to talk about it so that they are saying and seeing and using these words and ideas about text and how it gets put together. And basically, I like to think about the talk as sort of the talk button. So if you read something, you're sort of collecting all this information, you're putting fruit in your blender. And if you never talk about it, the fruit's just in the blender. You need to actually, can I do it? Yeah. Press blend. That's scary, my hand disappears. Okay. You need to actually press blend by talking about it in order for that fruit to change states and become a smoothie. So if we want students to learn from text, they have to change the state of that information. They can't just collect it all in their brain and hope that it, does something in there. They need an opportunity to process what they've just read, whether that is talking to a peer or talking in a text discussion, a class discussion, or whether it's writing it down. They do need to do that change of state from written to oral and back to written in their own hand, if that's a possibility. So when we think about this text-dependent talk, we think about opportunities to use students' innate interest in social relationships and connection with each other to talk about the texts that surround the content we're trying to teach, making sure that they get to use their talk to learn things instead of always just extinguishing their talk as something they do outside of learning, using their talk for learning, letting it be a way to process the new information that they're learning about text and about how texts get put together. And that builds not only competence because students know how to talk, so it's a very sort of low threshold, easy thing to engage with, but also confidence, because if we're talking about how texts are put together and what texts mean, they get to lean on each other's understanding and build sort of collective understanding of text, or lean on each other's understanding of student writing and build a collective understanding of how to write well or how to write better. And make connections between those things. Talk is also a way to feel connected to each other. And so the incentive of being able to talk to your classmates about something might be the reason that you pay attention and pile all the fruit into your blender, because you know you get to have that experience of chatting away with them at the end after you've read. So these are our four. Our idea at the beginning of the year is to set really clear task parameters. We're going to think about the networks in which words exist and how to make networked connections in our minds about them. We're going to present text in sets of ideas with multiple representations of the most important ideas we want to teach and multiple pathways for students to come into different concepts and understand how they appear in different places in the world. And we're going to end the year by thinking about how we can use talk to build our understanding of the things that we read and how we can write. So thinking about not only the what of a text, but the how texts are put together and why they're put together that way, to make sure that we're really well informed, strategic readers of the texts that show up in all the different content areas.